Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 4, Episode 12, Paradise Lost. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's right, and as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we're awesome. We're a good time. And you're going to love the things we talk about, especially if you are a Star Trek fan in general, and in particular, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine fan. Now, I will give a brief update about the Twitter situation. It looks like I'm finally starting to receive some assistance on that. So hopefully that will be cleared up here really soon. So stay tuned on that. But at least we're not totally out of it for that yet. Okay, so
Oh,
there.
man.
I'm trying. I have not given up, guys. I've not given up. I promise. So, but in the meantime, you can also, follow along on my personal account. There's links to that everywhere as well as the various stuff that we have on Facebook, as David mentioned. So there's plenty of other ways to find us besides just Twitter. But yeah, just be on the lookout. So. Tonight we are here to talk about the conclusion to Homefront, Paradise Lost. Wanted to say really quick, I love how with Deep Space Nine they rarely do like necessarily a part two, right? Like it's not Conundrum Part One and Conundrum Part Two. It's Homefront, Paradise Lost, and then it's something else. Like they don't have that. You know, sequence there, but we know that that's what it is.
Right.
And that's kind of how they got into their whole serialization and why it works so well for them. So we'll keep a lookout for that in other things as well. But before we get started, wanted to talk with David really quick because you had something pretty momentous happen for you recently, right?
It was my birthday, but I
Well,
mean,
hey, it's your birthday, right? You are even deeper into your 30s now. How does it feel?
33, baby. Woohoo!
Yeah. Any deep thoughts or revelations come as you sink ever further into uh approaching middle age?
I always make fun of my roommate because he's a little older than I am, and in my church small group, we're the two oldest. So I always tease him as the eldest of the group because I'm right behind him. Um, no immediate insights. It was a relatively small birthday this time around. I, just hung out with family. My brother and his wife and the two nieces came to visit my parents who live close by, and that was a great time to hang out with them and get some birthday cake and all that.
Mhm.
So nothing all that fancy, just spending time with friends and family. So
There's nothing wrong with that. And I think
yeah,
that as we all get a little bit older, I think we start to appreciate our friends and family a bit more than what we did when we were, in our teens and 20s and so forth. So, yeah. Okay, I just wanted to ask you because I felt weird not remarking on your birthday last time because your birthday was June 2nd, and
right,
then our episode aired June 3rd, but we had
right,
already recorded it the week before. So, you just
yeah.
completely got skipped in our whole
It's almost like
rigmarole
I
here.
planned it.
Right, right. Maybe I didn't
Yeah.
realize. So I kept
Yeah.
thinking about it. I was like, man, we had like this whole big window here where, it wasn't even just that we weren't, like talking about it. We just weren't doing anything. Like
Yeah.
we had nothing.
Right.
So,
Well, it's funny because
yeah.
of birthday stuff. Like, my parents were like, "Do you want anything for your birthday?" I was like, "Well, I mean, I've been thinking about maybe buying a watch, a nice watch online, but that's a couple $100. So I just buy that myself." And so like, okay, we'll just give you some money. Well, it turns out in a couple weeks we're all gonna go on a little vacation again for my niece's sake primarily. I got some tickets through work to SeaWorld. She's 5, the other one's 2. It's like, hey, we'll go to SeaWorld. And so my parents went ahead and rented an Airbnb, but they asked the rest of the family to chip in, because my sister's having to fly in, so she's gonna have to pay some to come visit. Can we pitch in to, help with all that? So it turns out my birthday present from my folks was I didn't have to pay them as much to chip in for the vacation. So I still gave them $300 as opposed to 400, which was just hilarious. It's like, happy birthday, you still owe us some money.
That's how it
I
works.
mean, that
Happy
was my
birthday,
pitch.
bud.
Yeah, that was
Right.
my pitch to them. So I mean, it's not like they said that to me. That was my pitch to them. But it's just, I think it's just funny. When you get to this part of life, money changes hands, birthdays come and go.
Right, and like you said, it becomes a time when if there's something that you want, you just buy it for yourself,
I'm so
and
bad about that too. I just, if I see something I want, click. I don't. My wish list for like Christmas is always a problem because I'm like, I have to think of things like, oh my goodness, if I want people to get me something, I have to think of what to say to get. So, anyway,
yeah. No, I'm right there with you. I either talk myself out of it or whatever it is that I get, there's a overly drawn out justification for it because I'm so bad at gifting things to myself. And seriously, I have those moments where I have to be like, no, you deserve it. You do so much and you handle so much, and it's okay. Splurge
right.
just one time. And then even then I'm like, nah,
Right.
nah, there's something else I can do.
Speaking of which, remind me, did you say on
Speaking of
stream?
which,
Did you say on stream last time that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
so no, I didn't say. I think I know what you're going to talk about. But
Yeah.
for those of you who have followed along with us, you maybe remember a long time ago, I had subscribed to the Eagle Moss Build the Enterprise kit thing.
Right.
They send you sections of it in the mail. You put it together, and it says every month you get like another kit that adds onto it, and it's this ginormous model of the Enterprise that you are
Right.
building. Well, for those of you who may either remember from us talking about it here or from your own experience with Eagle Moss, that company went belly up several months ago, and that whole process stopped. You couldn't order models, and you certainly couldn't order your Build the Enterprise kit. Well,
Right.
about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I got an email from a new company called, I think I said before it was called Fan Base, but it's actually called Fan Home. They have taken over all of the Eagle Moss stuff. So if you want to order model ships, if you want to do any kind of figurines, action figures, anything like that, they've kind of consolidated the base for all that. So they have now picked up the slack on that, and they just sent me an email saying that they are going to be resuming the
Yes.
Build the Enterprise kit. And if you were doing it previously when it got canceled, they will allow you to pick up where you left off. You don't have to go
Nice.
back to the beginning, which is
Right.
great because what would you do with all those pieces, right? So they sent me my official invitation to invite me back into the process, and I have to admit, as excited as I am, I have not signed back up for it yet. Uh,
What?
I because again, like I said, I just was like in my head about it, and I know it's silly, and I know I should just do it, especially since I've already started it. I should get the rest of it and finish it. I'll be mad at
Right.
myself years from now that I will have this box of metal components that I
Right.
did nothing with. So I might as
Right.
well do it. I think I'm right now using you guys to talk myself into doing it, by the way.
Yes. There you go. There
Um,
you go.
but
Yep.
yeah, so and I mean, and again, it's going to be a pretty impressive model. They sent when Eagle Moss was doing it, they sent this poster that's like a live, or not live, but it's a
Large. It's a full scale.
accurate, yeah,
Like replica.
representation of the model, and it's huge. It's
Right.
absolutely monstrous, and it's made from die-cast metal. So not only is it going to be big, it's going to be heavy. And I was even thinking about it earlier, earlier on months ago. I have no idea where I'm going to put it. It's going to be pretty massive. So I was like, I might try to like turn it into like a coffee table, put like a structure around it so that it's like
Ah,
on display but
it's
protected,
still protected. That'd be
Yeah,
pretty
so I'm
cool.
I'm thinking that's what I'm gonna do with it.
Yeah,
But other than
display
that, I was like,
space kind.
right. I've thought about like maybe trying to figure out a way to like hang it, but at the same
Right.
time, it's going to be so heavy. I just don't think that's feasible. Like I remember holding some of the pieces like when the kit came through that was the nacelles for this, the star drive, the engines.
Right.
They were so heavy. They were surprisingly heavy. And I was like, imagine this and then the whole saucer section. It would be too heavy to hang and be safe, I feel. Like
Right.
I would be worried that it would fall to the ground at any moment. So
Right.
I'm thinking having it on a stand and then putting like a glass encasement around it and making like a glorified coffee table would be the better and safer bet for it.
Right.
But yeah, I'm most likely going to resume maybe starting next month. I think I'll sign back up and just go with it.
There you go.
If anyone is interested and you want to have your own kit or you want to build other things. So they said they're going to have other models for other things, not just Star Trek. They've got like one for, I think, the Batmobile was one that I saw on their website. And then they had several
Nice.
others. The Normandy from Mass Effect was on there as well.
Ooh,
And then, of course, there's just models of ships that you can just buy from them that they have modeled from whatever, from various series.
that's really cool.
Yeah. So if you're interested in those at all, just go to www.fanhome.com and they will have all their stuff for you there. And no, this is not a paid promotion in any way. I don't know why I feel like I need to say that, but yeah, they're doing it now. Eagle Moss is not, as far as I understand it, Eagle Moss is like never going to return. So there.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if it was like they were just bought out by Fan Home, or if they just bought the rights to sell stuff again, or I don't know.
Well,
I'd be
Eagle
curious.
Moss crashed long before Fan Home came on the set. I came on the scene. I think um, that this is kind of their way of trying to recoup some of the losses because there was a lot of outrage, I know,
Right,
behind Eagle Moss falling through because a lot of people had signed up for the monthly subscription through Eagle Moss where they were sending you ships. They would send you whole models of ships,
right,
and so if you had signed up, most people signed up like for a year of that, a year subscription, and they were, 3, 4, 5 months in, and then all of a sudden the company was gone, but they'd already paid that money.
right.
So this is their way of trying to, I guess, honor that without having to do a large number of refunds and so forth, I think.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
one last thing before we turn our attention to the show. As we know, Father's Day is coming up, and I saw something, and this was a one of the few moments where I didn't have to, pound my brain. Do it, you deserve it, right? Something came up online, and I saw it, and I knew that I had to have it. And with the help of my daughter, we were able to pick a design and make it so, as Jean Luc would say. And I just want to show it off real quick. It's my new mug that says
Best
"Best
dad.
Dad in the Universe." So it's in
Yeah.
print, guys. I'm sorry, it's in print. You gotta believe it. But the best part, and this is the part that my daughter helped me design, is the other sign where you see
Ah,
us
that's
in our
great.
uniforms, and it's got our names on it, my name and my
That's
daughter's name,
fantastic. My
complete with
goodness.
her signature hairstyle, which she was
Right.
just through the moon about. So it's like this is us. This is
That's definitely you
our,
two.
yes.
Yeah,
So we were quite excited about this, and I believe you can still get these as well. There was a link that was flying around on various Star Trek sites where you could get this mug. It's basically a Yeti mug with this design on the outside. So,
that's great.
um, and you can get them in a bunch of different ones. Like I obviously went with this particular style, which David doesn't know anything about yet, but it is the Deep Space Nine styling of uniform that we're going to
Okay.
see later. And then, but you can get them in any of them. They had the original series, they've got Discovery, they've got Next Generation, of course, Voyager. They're all there, so you can just pick whichever one you like and make it happen. So for the best dad in your universe, I would strongly suggest, if they're a Star Trek fan, getting them their own
Nice.
mug.
Great.
But we are not here to talk about any of that. Not really. We are here to talk about Paradise Lost, the 12th episode of the fourth season, our 90th episode, coming up on the big 100 here real soon.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, David, would you like to give our recap?
I can do it this time, I guess. All right, guys. So, again, this is a sequel or a part two to Homefront, which we did last time. We might remember that in Homefront, Odo had joined Jake and Cisco back on Earth because Earth had experienced a terrorist event where we believe a changeling was responsible for killing about 27 diplomats. So, being brought to Earth, Cisco is put in charge of Earth defenses by his former commanding officer, Layton, Admiral Layton. At the end of the episode, Layton and Cisco went to the president of the Federation and said, "Look, the power relays on Earth have been sabotaged. We need to have martial law in order to protect Earth against a changeling threat." So that's where things were left off last time, with the military basically uh, coming down and patrolling Earth. So now that they've been in control of Earth for the last several days, things haven't really happened. Nothing else has happened. There have been no terrorist threats. There's been no military, invasion. Nothing's really been happening, which is strange. Why all this him and hawing if 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 the power relays were down, why wasn't there an invasion? Cisco is suspicious, along with Odo, and so after Cisco is confronted by a changeling presenting himself as Miles O'Brien and insinuating that there are only four changelings on Earth, and then how look how much trouble we've caused with just four changelings, we can get more done. Um, this is a piece of cake for us, is what he basically says. Um, the Cisco is like, okay, what's going on? And so he gets Cadet Nog, to tell him more about the secretive group of cadets known as Red. What was it? Red Group, Red Team.
Red Squad.
There we go, Red Squad. Apparently, it's an elite group, but they're also secretive and selective. And Cisco has been suspicious about them, and he learns that Admiral Layton used them during the first hours of the blackout in a secret mission, and he basically forces one of the Red Squad cadets to admit to what they did. He gets one of the cadets in there and he says, "I know what you did, but I want you to tell me what you did." One of those reverse psychology moments. And he learns that Admiral Layton used these children, these cadets, to actually perform the shutdown of Earth's power grid. It was not the changelings, or at the very least, it wasn't the changelings. Or Admiral Layton was the one who's actually doing it. If he's a changeling, we don't know. But point is that it wasn't an outside group that did it, as far as we can tell. It was within the Federation that this was done. And it becomes clear that Admiral Layton, the man we know, is the same man. It's not a changeling impersonating him like what happened in the last episode. Admiral Layton has been, for some time, planning a military coup d'etat. He believes the changeling threat is so significant that the Federation president, Jaresh Inyo, is not up to the task. He is, and so he will take control of Earth. If that means he has to basically institute a military dictatorship, he will do so until the changeling threat is done away with, until they're successful. Of course, Cisco can't stand for that. And so he goes to Jara Shinyo and says, "I believe that there's a coup taking place." Jara Shinyo is, of course, incensed by the idea that there would be a military coup. How dare you make such a claim? I need evidence. And so Cisco says he'll get it. Unfortunately, Admiral Layton uses some of his other officers to fake evidence that Cisco is a changeling when they do a blood test on him, which is never explained, unfortunately.
No, it's not.
Yeah. And so he is imprisoned. But before all that happens, Cisco did contact Major Kira on Deep Space Nine, and she, along with the rest of the officers, confirmed that there was a Starfleet officer on Deep Space Nine who had manipulated the wormhole to look like it was doing activity that it shouldn't be doing, to suggest that a cloaked Dominion fleet was coming through the wormhole. So they have arrested him, and they are bringing him on the Defiant to Earth to present evidence that Admiral Layton is trying to commit a coup d'etat. Admiral Layton learns of this, so he sends one of his ships, the Lakota, which we heard about last episode, to go confront the Defiant and, if necessary, fire on it and stop it from arriving on Earth to undermine his plans. So the Defiant is fired upon by the Lakota, but the Lakota had its weapons upgraded, but the Defiant had better shielding than they expected. So the Defiant is able to survive the battle And even though the Lakota's commander is told by Admiral Layton to destroy the ship if necessary, she ultimately stands down, and Lakota allows the Defiant to continue on. Cisco, with the help of Odo, escapes from his jail cell, confronts Layton with a phaser, and basically talks Layton down from his position of trying to commit a coup d'etat, which, by the way, looked like he was either willing to assassinate the president or, at the very least, forcibly remove him from power within a few days. And so Layton resigns, saying, I hope you are not wrong about this and that um, things don't go badly. I know that was kind of a lot. There's a lot to talk about. Basically, coup d'etat was attempted by a Federation officer, Admiral Layton. Cisco realizes it and helps bring it to a stop. Meanwhile, the changeling threat is kind of it's there, but it's kind of takes a back seat in this episode, actually, which I will have thoughts on as we talk. So yeah, anything you would like to add, Perry, to that recap?
Nope, pretty accurate. I will just say that if you want any more detail, then go watch the episode. In fact, why haven't you already watched the episode? You should watch it before you come to our show. You know what's coming. We're doing them in order. So go watch it. Show's like 30 years old. So I'm not even going to give you a spoilers warning.
if
Um,
you're if you're this far into our show, 90 episodes in, I think you know that by
yeah, I
now.
think that you would know that we're going to spoil everything. That's what we do.
Exactly.
But no, pretty good recap. So you hit the high points, and we're going to go over the rest of it here. I wanted to just start with the ending of Homefront, and then the beginning here of Paradise Lost. In watching it, and watching the end of Homefront in particular, I remember thinking, so I had so many questions, right? Like, how did the changelings infiltrate the power network? And we talked about some of these in our last episode. I got kept asking about space dock and how they, knocked out all the relays and all this stuff, right?
Right.
So then, of course, we come into this episode, and what do we see? Like right off the bat, Cisco asking the same questions. How did they sabotage the entire power grid and the backups? How did they, like all the stuff that they were supposedly able to, the changelings were supposedly able to do, but then they did what afterwards? As Odo pointed
Right.
out, Earth was now secure. In fact, it was more secure than it had
Right.
ever been before, and there
Right.
was no additional attack. So, like Cisco says, the more you think about it, the more you realize things just don't make sense. If the
Right.
changelings were truly trying to invade and disturb the peace and all that, then um,
Their window
they
of
they had
opportunity
ample
has
opportunity.
passed. Yeah.
Right. And now
Yeah.
it's over with. And and it also kind of, makes me wonder what exactly were the changelings doing on Earth? Because we know
Right.
they're there. We see one meet with Cisco later on. We saw in the video that of the explosion that brought Cisco to Earth in the first place, that they were on Earth. We know they're there. So it's like, what's the speculation as to what they're doing? I figured that what they were really doing was more along the lines of intelligence gathering. They're not ready
Right.
to actually strike yet, but they
Right.
need to understand how the Federation works, in particular, how Starfleet works, and what better place to do that than the heart of Starfleet, Earth. So they wouldn't necessarily want to mess things up and draw attention to themselves. Now they're just here to study.
Right.
Leighton is the one who is doing things that's making it difficult. Even to a degree, it's making things difficult for the changelings because, again, now they're doing phaser sweeps and blood screenings, and they've locked down all this stuff. So they wouldn't have done the things that would have triggered the alarm, because that would have defeated their purpose of infiltration and study.
Right.
But I just like that, Cisco had the same questions I did when the episode first started, like right off the bat. And once again, we see Odo is on the case. He's asking about Red Squad. Why were they sent away and then beamed back and then, mobilized back and forth? You know, Odo and Cisco work so well together, and we've remarked on this before in this show, and it's one of the pairings that we see sparingly.
Yeah.
The two of them together, which doesn't make any sense to me because they complement each other so well.
Yeah. Yeah. Cisco understands Odo, and that makes Odo more effective because he's given a superior officer who knows how to let Odo loose. And like the climax of this episode is that Cisco is confronting Layton while Odo is going to President Jurish Inyo.
Hmm.
Um, and we don't see Odo talking to him, but we know that that is the reason that Layton basically stands down. He's like, my cover is blown. I can't get away with my coup d'état anymore. And so that's what convinces him to give up his plans. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's Cisco and Odo together are a powerful pair. Yeah,
I also love that um, Cisco obviously had this planned out with Odo to go and talk to President Enyo, about what was going on. Meanwhile, he's basically being arrested and locked away. Basically, he's buying time for Odo to kind of go back behind him and do all these things. Because when Leighton confronts Cisco in Jarge Enyo's office and manufactures the changeling evidence,
right.
no one asked where's Odo. Like no one. They
Yeah,
just arrested Cisco and kept it moving.
that's
I
a good
to,
point.
to me that was like a glaring error. It was like, okay,
Yeah,
you can't arrest him and not stop the security officer he came with.
right.
Why? Why not? And
Yeah,
especially considering Odo is a changeling, he is the face of the threat. Having him arrested and further disgracing Cisco. Oh, he's worked with changelings. He's been, mind altered or replaced. It would have made Leighton's case even stronger, and yet they
yeah,
just nothing,
yeah,
nothing.
yeah,
Meanwhile, Odo's just around here. I don't know. Guess he was a seagull again, or we know he turned into a serving tray at some point to beat up some cadets.
right.
So I mean, it's just like no one, and that also was another thing that was a glaring error to me because, like, okay, so you've implemented blood screenings, phaser sweeps, and so forth, yet somehow Odo was able to become a serving tray and get all the way into your secure facility where you're holding Cisco. No one
Yeah,
thought to phaser the
yeah.
tray or the chair.
That's a great
Nothing.
question.
Like so many, like just
Well,
everybody just
to be
lax.
very
No one.
clear, they addressed that. Odo says, "I was able to get in here because I helped you define the regulations for security." So he knew what the security measures were going to be, and therefore knew how to avoid them. But it is still a good question of like, seriously, like even then you were still able to dodge and weave around all the
Right. At some point though, they still something should have been submitted for scan.
exactly.
There should have been a phaser. Like, don't you have? I would just assume there's a room somewhere where you store your trays, and not just left out in the hallway, right?
Yeah,
So when you're going to get one, why wouldn't you just open the door, give it a quick phaser sweep, and then
yeah,
grab what you need and move on?
right.
No one do this.
Yeah,
Everybody's armed. Everybody's
yeah.
walking around with phasers right now. How hard would I have been to be like, you know what? Real quick, change the setting. All right, we're good. Let's
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Um, I guess it's just going to show again because the people in power knew the threat wasn't real, or at least not to the extent that was being reported to everyone else, because they were the ones manipulating everything. They were the ones who were pulling the strings to make other people think the threat was
That is
higher.
true to some level, but in the last episode, we found out there was a changeling impersonating Leighton.
Hmm.
So they were able to infiltrate to a high level. The real question is, I mean, to go back to the point, how were they able to fake the test that Cisco was a changeling? Because the one time we've seen that exact same test faked was at the end of season 3 when there was a changeling impersonating Dr. Bashir. He did the
That's right.
exact same thing. So I mean, as far as I know, the woman whose name I don't remember, but she was the captain of
Benteen,
the Benteen,
Captain
who-
Benteen.
and she became the captain of the Lakota, and she was
Hmm.
also the same actress who played that one
Dr.
character, the
Leia Bombs.
scientist from
Hmm.
TNG. But anyway, which I recognized now that you mentioned it. I was like, oh, that is her. And I looked close. At one point, the camera was like right up on her face. I was like, oh, I recognize her.
Yeah, yeah. She got more screen time in this second part than she did in the
In
first.
the first part. And I,
Yeah.
I have to say, I liked her part better in TNG because she had more to do. She was more of a personality. And this one, she's just Leighton's secondhand man, basically. She doesn't really get to do much of her own character. She's not her own character very much. Anyway, when she fakes it, I was like, she's a changeling. Like, they might all be changelings for all I know. Like, that's the coup d'etat. Like, that's how effective they are. Everyone,
Mhm.
and the president he's gonna be forced to say, take Cisco away, and then that'll be the end of it. And that'll be the end of Earth. But then Cisco's later like, you'll have to tell me how you faked it. I was like, faked it? Like, we already knew Leighton might be a changeling. What's not to say that that changeling came back and that the real Leighton really has been knocked off? And
Right.
even if he was preparing a coup d'état, the changelings realized it was a brilliant time to make their move, and instead of bringing about the Dominion fleet,
Right.
they'll just take over his plan, and that's how they've
Which
always done it. The
which would have been in perfect keeping with what we know of the Changelings, what they've done before. Remember when
exactly,
they took out the
yes,
Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order? They
right,
became aware of the plan. They just changed the plan slightly to benefit them. Same
exactly.
thing could have happened here. They become
That's
aware of Leighton's plan to do a
right.
coup d'etat and just subvert the plan to work in their own
Yeah,
favor.
exactly. The way the changelings have always worked is they create distrust, they create a paranoia, and then when the paranoia drives someone to act violently, they circumvent that for their own ends, and that's how they take over a planet. That's what I
Mhm.
was expecting to be at the end of the episode here on some level. And so I have to say I am disappointed that the changeling threat seemed to take a back seat in this episode where it was the main feature of the previous one.
I,
Not
you
that
know,
I
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go
Well,
ahead.
I just want to say that it's not the idea that this episode is trying to make is that the worst, sometimes the worst enemy is the person standing right next to you, is the person who decides to take drastic action, a radical drastic action, and undermines the very thing they're trying to accomplish. Trying to protect the Federation or paradise, as Cisco puts it, by destroying it, is ridiculous. The whole reason you have the Federation and you have Starfleet is to protect the law and order that it represents, and to undermine that law and order is to undermine everything it represents, everything it stands for, and therefore you're undoing everything you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
And so I like that angle. I get it, but I feel like this episode. Let me put it this way:
it
I
let you down.
wish I wanted the changeling twist to come. I want the
Yeah,
changelings to be
that's
like the only
That's what I was
changeling.
going to that's what I was gonna say. The problem with this episode is that they used the changelings at all.
Right,
Using the fear of the changelings would have been one thing, but the fact
right,
that we know
yes,
excuse me, the fact that we know that changelings are on Earth and are doing things,
right.
it it splits the story because even after
Yes.
we resolve the issue with Leighton, we still have changelings among us. We still have
Right.
changelings on Earth who are doing things. If you want to believe the O'Brien changeling when they show up, that there's
Right.
four changelings somewhere on Earth,
Right.
we need a whole episode dedicated to rooting out these four changelings and figuring out what the heck they're doing.
Exactly.
And we
Yes.
don't get it. And we need
Nope.
explanations for other things.
Right.
Why were they at that meeting that eventually blew up and then kind of kamikaze
Or
themselves
was
there?
that faked? Do we need to
Or was that
know?
right? Or was that faked? How
Right.
did they fake that blood test? Who
Right.
was that changeling that impersonated Leighton?
Right.
There's so many unanswered questions from the first part of this episode that
Right.
it does distract from this whole notion of the fear mongering and the kind of an odd 24th century Red Scare thing that they were doing here.
Right.
With you don't really know who's what, and
Right.
this fear and the need to concentrate power, and in order to protect the golden era that you think that you're living in, and
Right.
this need to protect it, and then you going overboard the way Leighton did, and stripping back freedoms and so forth, all under the guise of protection. I mean,
Right.
great story, but it's overshadowed by the fact that you introduced and used a very real threat.
Right. And I would say that that also ties in a little bit to my complaint of I don't feel like this was enough of a Star Trek episode in the sense of where does the sci-fi Star Trekky elements come into play where they couldn't have played on some other show? Any other show could have. I mean, Battlestar Galactica had similar questions of, you know, does the Pegasus commander Her name I can't remember. I mean, she is when
Admiral Helena Kane.
there you go.
Sorry,
When
couldn't
she
let that go.
strips, when we find out that it turns out that her Pegasus, Battlestar Pegasus, had been protecting a fleet just like Battlestar Galactica, but at some point she decided to cannibalize all the other ships for parts and people and then abandon it. That is an example again of you undermine everything you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to protect civilization and protect people, when you only are out for yourself, yada yada yada. So my point is that I feel like this story that we were told in this episode, yes, it has Star Trek elements. It's the Federation. We have the Changelings as the threat, but the story itself is something that could be told elsewhere in a different setting.
Yeah.
It,
Well,
that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that's always been kind of an aim of Star Trek to take stories that could be told in a more conventional setting and bring them into sci-fi, and to kind of give this interpretation that will allow kind of a more moralistic stance. You know,
Well, to be
Star
very
Trek has done that several times, and I think that this is another attempt that again it would have worked, but the changing element to it added too much that it distracted from the message they were trying to
right,
deliver with this
right,
episode.
yeah, and I feel like actually the episode itself actually addresses this very concern in a different way. In the last episode, uh, Cisco Senior, the grandfather
Joseph.
here,
Hmm.
Joseph, he was upset by the idea of having blood tests taken, and that created a whole scene. He is
Hmm.
objecting loudly, and Cisco is pleading with him, please take the test. I need you to take the test. And then, oh, I was worried you might be a changeling because you were refusing. And then in this episode, he's getting his blood tested and he's fine. And Cisco says, "Hey, like, what changed?" And his father is like, "Look, you give me grief either way. Either I don't do it and you give me grief. I do it now, and you give me grief." And
Hmm.
Cisco actually does do something I like. I like that he stands down and says, "That's okay, dude, you're right. I'm overreacting. Now that you're doing it, I should just be thankful. I'm just worried." And he moves on. And I'm glad for the character reacting that way, but it does address the problem. Whereas Cisco Senior Joseph is suddenly different in this episode. He's changed. He's willing to go along with it. The context of the threat also changes, and I feel it's too abrupt because, as we just said, the
Yeah,
changeling threat is in the background where it was primary in the previous episode. Yeah. Anyway.
because at this point they were trying to make a point about how people are willing to overlook certain infringements upon their freedoms and autonomy when there is a threat of danger or harm, and
Right.
then they were talking and trying to branch that into how we can allow this to corrupt our leaders and officials and people who and people who've always kind of hungered for power, how they come out in these moments and they bring out the worst in us in these
Right.
moments, because that's what Leighton is. Leighton is a person who, you know, on paper he's a great person, he's a great officer. He's only ever wanted to, you know, protect the fleet, protect Starfleet, protect Earth. And that sounds very well and good and noble, but his methodologies for doing it, you know, he's gone from the principles that Starfleet was founded on, that, you know, Ben swore to uphold, to
Right.
now he is doing these much more, you know, underhanded and nefarious things to achieve this end. And even Odo pointed out, he's like, you know, you swore to uphold these, you know, tenets of the Federation. And so it's not you, Cisco, turning your back on them. They've already turned their back on you. Because if you believe these things, if these are the core values that you have, if you don't stand up to these people who have now subverted all of that,
Right.
then then you are the traitor, not them.
Right.
Is the kind of the point that Odo makes, and that's what we kind of see here with Joseph, because he made such a very strong case for why he would not submit to the blood screenings. You know, you going around having to prove who you are at the drop of a dime, and all this stuff. That was his objection. You know, and then for him to just turn around and not only is he cooperating, but he's smiling. He's in a good mood. He's happy for the blood screenings. You know, he comes in smiling and rubbing his
Yeah.
arm and all that stuff. And yeah, that's what kind of, you know, does alert Ben here, because he's like, you know, you were so against it and now you're not. And yeah, and you're right. Joseph points out to him, hey, you were upset when I didn't do it. Now you're upset that I'm doing it. Like, what's the deal?
Right.
And it's, kind of uncovering that whole, the true objection was not that he was um submitting to the blood screenings. It was w- what it took to get him to submit to the blood screenings, which was
Right.
the problem.
Right.
And that again points us right back to Leighton. And again, that's a great bit that they could have used throughout the episode, but it's constantly overshadowed when we know that there are changelings running around,
Yeah.
probably doing things.
Right.
So, and then Leighton loses. He loses, and I feel like he surrenders, not just because they prove their case against him to President Enyo, but more because Benteen stood down. She was
Yes.
attacking the Defiant,
Yes.
and then she decided, for whatever reason, because we don't even get to see that really. We know that the Defiant and the Lakota are fighting, and then the next thing that we see is Worf saying, "It's over. We're here."
Right.
You know
Right.
that we don't get to hear the conversation between Benteen and Worf or
Right.
anybody that would have given her a reason to suddenly switch sides,
Right.
because
Right.
in everything that we've seen of her so far, like you said, she was Leighton's right hand. She believed everything. She went along with everything. For her to suddenly, in this moment, switch gears, I feel like we deserve to see that conversation, and we didn't.
Yeah.
So a lot of little bits here and there, which I hate to say it, I think this is the first time that for Deep Space Nine, that we've seen anyway, that a two-parter episode fails. Because a lot of times we've said we wish this episode was a two-parter because we
Right.
needed more. In
Right.
this case, we almost need this one to be a three or even
Yeah.
four-parter because there were so many things that just didn't get wrapped up.
And to be very clear, actually, a three-parter would have been great if this had been the middle part. It's the what's the second gosh, second Star Wars, or yeah, Star Wars movie, The Empire Strikes Back. That's it.
Yes.
The Empire Strikes Back is considered by a lot of fans of the Star Wars movies to be like the best one. It's the one where Luke is revealed to be Darth Vader's son. You
Hmm.
have it's the whole idea is where the Darth Vader's march, the Imperial March finally came in. That's when John Williams introduced that. Bum bum, great stuff. Anyway, point is that the middle part of a story is where it gets dark, it gets deep. It's where the conflicts are really coming to bear. How are we
Hmm.
going to solve the problem? If this had been a three-parter, this actually would have been a fine middle part. Yeah,
Yes.
we are losing our ability to see clearly in the midst of a serious issue. But then part three comes out and the real threat is revealed, and we have to get together. And maybe Leighton is redeemed in some capacity. But unfortunately, we have a two-parter. And actually, this reminds me, wasn't it the opening of season two that had a three-parter? That was the three-part episode, right?
we It was a three-parter because season one ended with the cliffhanger, and then the first two episodes of season two um wrapped it all up. So
Right,
that was their kind of cheat to get us a three-parter, because we
right.
had what ended the first season, and then what brought you into the second season was kind of, the ending of all of that stuff. And so
Well,
yeah, but they didn't. But
kind
again,
of.
They didn't title it like part one, part two, part three. It was just,
Well, I'm looking
these
at it right now. It's
continuations.
episode one of season two was the homecoming, and then it was the circle, and then it was the siege. So it was
Yes.
a three-part episode at the beginning of season two, but it did follow upon the finale of season one, where Vedic Lynn
So
was introduced. Uh, so it is in
so
part,
essentially, it's a four-parter
in a
episode because it
sense.
ended with
Yeah.
what was in season one, and then yeah, and I don't know why they didn't, considering how great that section of episodes is. It's amazing to me that they did not go back to that format more. Now, I know that this episode, or these two episodes, Homefront Paradise Live, were originally slated to be the opener for season four, but that was scrapped
Ah,
because they were trying to, they had
yeah.
decided to do
Worf.
Way of the Warrior to bring Worf in, and needed to incorporate him into the storyline because of, later later plans. So there was a
Right.
need to do that sooner rather than later. And then they also didn't want to do another weird cliffhanger on the uh, end of a season. Um, but all that's neither here nor there because it doesn't really detract from the story at all. I
Right.
like these two episodes because it's beginning to get us to pivot a bit into the greater complexity of Deep Space Nine and the Dominion and things that are to come. We were kind of getting to see more of that, and there's a lot that's getting ready to happen throughout the rest of season four that all of these things relate back to. And this is why I love this show so much because you don't really realize it unless one, someone's pointing it out to you, like I'm doing right now, and then two, they do enough callbacks later on in episodes that you'll be like, oh, yeah, that was Homefront, and even in this episode, there's a bit of a callback because the whole thing about the notion of paradise and Earth being paradise. This has been touched upon before in Deep Space Nine, when he was still Commander Cisco,
Mhm.
and his friend Captain or Commander, the guy who was with the Maquis, who was actually a
Yeah,
secret Maquis
I
officer or
know who you're
whatever.
talking about. I can't remember his name either,
I
but
can't
yeah.
remember. I don't know why I can't remember his name right now. It's going to make me upset. But anyway, you know, they were arguing about the validity of the Federation trying to police the people in the
Right.
demilitarized zone. And Ben gives a speech about paradise and the perception of paradise and why what works on Earth doesn't work out here in the frontier because
Hudson.
it's different. Hudson, yes. And he says it's easy to be a saint in paradise,
Right.
and this is kind of that, bringing that back here to this episode because Earth is seen as so idyllic,
Right.
and then to have these attacks on the home soil really, ruins that. And then you have a person like Leighton who's kind of grown up in this,
Right.
and a lot of his actions are incredibly xenophobic. He dismisses Jairus. He's like, he's great president and all, but he's not from here. He's not one of us. What does he
Yeah.
know?
Right.
That's his whole attitude.
Right.
And everything he does is to um, protect humans
Right.
from outsiders, from
Right.
the ultimate outsider, which is the shapeshifter, the
Right.
changeling.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very interesting way to set that up. And again, a lot of great stuff here that could have been touched on later on, but once again, overshadowed by the fact that there are changelings among us, and we
Yeah.
need to figure out who they are.
Right.
And to segue further on that, I just want to ask you, what did you think of O'Brien the Changeling?
Oh, it's always well, I like the Odo. I'm sorry, the O'Brien changeling in he's trying to get a reaction out of Cisco. He's jabbing him. O'Brien is not that type, so you see Cole Meany playing a sarcastic, irritating person is kind of funny because it's like that's not who O'Brien is.
He was
Um,
very irritating. Like
yeah,
everything about him, he sounded way too happy,
yeah, you
way too
solids
jovial.
are
Yeah,
stupid and we're so much more intelligent and we like shape shifting and I can switch somewhere easily. Part of me wishes Cisco had done something like grab him and like hold on to him and like I'm not gonna let you go. But of course it wouldn't have worked. Cisco knows that it wouldn't have worked. Um, but yeah, it was. Are you saying that there's gonna be more of it? Is that why you're asking?
no, I'm just asking what you thought in general. I'm not saying one way or another. There's going to be more O'Brien the
Yeah,
Changeling. Just what did you
yeah.
think?
Brian the Changeling. Oh man.
I
But
mean,
I
I
mean
I
that
found him annoying. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's also because we know O'Brien. We know what he's about,
right,
and to have this weirdly childish thing, this representation,
right.
it was bothersome. But I did like one thing that he said, and he said, "You don't fear us the way, or we don't fear you the way you fear us,"
Right.
which I think is a very interesting take on the whole changeling, culture and mindset.
Yeah.
There, from the stories that we've heard about them, it's always been this fear of persecution from the solids, right? They
Right.
call us solids, and that our persecution of them stemmed from this fear and intense jealousy because they were so different and because they could be anything.
Right.
And so their fear of us is basically they're just trying to exist as they are,
Right.
and it's our fear which drives them to protect themselves.
Right.
Whereas our fear is they can be anything, they can do anything, they can
Right.
be anywhere,
Right.
you know. I think the fear stems from that loss of privacy, I guess. Because if you can be anything and you can be anywhere and you can be anyone, then the thought of trying to form a connection with somebody, falls. It fails completely because
Right.
that person could not be who you think they are.
Right.
So I was trying to figure out what that fear was, like, because he says it, you don't fear, we don't fear you the way you fear us. So it's like, how do we fear the changelings? What is it? What would be that fear?
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I come up with is that I think it's a loss, a potential loss of privacy.
Yeah. I also would say if I had a changeling in front of me, is like you can do all these things that make us afraid that you might do things that were like you might hurt us and we're not prepared to protect ourselves. And then you are doing the very things we're afraid of. You are deceiving us and harming us with your deception. That's why we fear you.
Right.
Odo, we're not afraid of Odo because Odo doesn't use his abilities to hurt people. We know who Odo is. We trust him. He is a changeling in every other way. He can mimic all kinds of things, but he's never done anything out of selfish reasons. And that's why we fear the changelings, is because they have proven themselves willing to use their abilities in harmful ways to others. And yes,
Yeah.
there's always the point of like, well, a changeling could have always been accused of something, and therefore it maybe the changeling argument is like we're just preemptively defending ourselves, and we're doing it in the way we know that works. Okay, it's an argument to make, but it's not a lasting solution. It's not going to
Yeah.
create. You're only going to ever have animosity with everyone else. There's no peaceful solution with your route. So I actually, it really is a curious question. Like, how are we going to resolve the Dominion issue, the Changeling issue? Is Odo going to be the ultimate peacemaker between the Changeling Society and the Federation? Is he going to somehow bridge that gap? Because that would be fascinating, and I would love to see that. But at this point, they're still a malevolent force. So
I was always trying to think also, um, the first encounter of a solid with a changeling, right? And it's like what you said. They use their ability; they can be anything, and doing it in front of us,
mhm,
changing in front of us, and showing us what all their potential, right? There would have to be the realization that while this is something that we can see them do, the change and everything else, as they've also indicated, once they change into whatever it is, that's what they that's what they appear as. That's what they are. That's what if you were to scan, like Odo says, if you were to scan me while I'm a rock, you're going to read a rock. If you scan
right,
me as a bird, I'm a bird.
right,
You don't pick up anything. You don't detect anything. And I was just thinking how much of our existence relies on us being able to look at something and identify it instantly as a
what it
threat or
is.
not, right?
Oh, right,
Now we get this. People have gotten these things wrong. That's why we have the whole phrase of trial and error. But for the most part, when you're walking and you see a rock, you don't think there's a possibility that that rock's going to suddenly sprout tentacles and pick you up and hurl you 30 feet, right?
no, I
But
can't say that
right.
happens.
And again, if thinking about that, if that was suddenly a potential that the door frame could suddenly come alive and wrap you up and strangle you, you would look at doors a lot differently, whether that door could do it or not. I'm just saying, right?
Yes, that's
When we
true.
see a
Yeah,
tiger, when we see a tiger walking towards us down the street randomly, you don't stop and go, it's entirely possible that thing's going to speak to me in my language. That's not a thought that you have. So so I'm only trying to point out that like he said, we don't fear you the way you fear us. And I was trying to figure out the fear, and I feel like the fear is because they represent such a unknown in a highly evolved, intelligent form.
Yeah.
They have language, they have a culture, they have a whole society. In
Right.
addition to that, they can literally be anything,
Right.
you know? So the fact that they can operate in such a manner, I think, is where I guess our fear of them would come from.
Right.
And so then trying to figure out what's like he says, you don't fear. I keep saying it. We don't fear you the way you fear us. So what's their fear? How do they fear us?
Yeah.
Because, like you just said, at some point, the founders decided that the best way to eliminate their fear was to try to control everything.
Right.
They want to, that's what the Dominion is. That's why they have the Jem'Hadar, right?
Right.
So then what is it? What do we represent to them that would make them so fearful of us? They've got to put these layers in place. They've got spies and subterfuge and a whole battalion of murderous, I don't know, what do you want to call them? Lizards with bones on their face that are ready to just spring through the wormhole and kill everybody. So
Yeah.
what is it?
Right.
How do we represent a something to be feared to them?
Right.
Is it our overwhelming numbers? Is it our vast technology at this point that we can bring to bear on them? Is it because um, we can burn their whole planet? Like that was the Romulan and Cardassian plan, was to
Right.
just destroy the whole planet.
Right.
So what would you say? I guess I'm asking you. Think like a changeling. What would be your
Yeah.
fear of the solids?
I would say it's probably they were never. I mean, I don't know what kind of homeworld they had or how they started transporting themselves around to different planets, but they they must have never been accepted by any society they ever went to because Odo presents himself as a humanoid, but he is a unique humanoid. My point
Mhm,
here is that either the changelings have to present themselves as mimics of someone else, and so that's freaky and off-putting, and
mhm,
so that scares people. And if they present themselves as an individual, like Odo is, well, then they're identifiable. And if they're identifiable, they can be persecuted. And if they can be persecuted, they can be killed. Then, so that's probably what happened. Were they made people afraid of them either on accident or on purpose because they could mimic things that made people afraid. But when they tried to be individuals or stand out as their own group, they were able to be persecuted and hunted down. And so they had to revert back to hiding. And then their ultimate solution was to go from hiding to control, which they've proven to be successful at. And for however long, that's how they've been doing things.
mhm.
And Odo is proof of the being successful as an individual. He is not mimicking anyone else. He's not hiding amongst the population
It's true.
as something else. He is obviously a changeling. His face doesn't quite work. It's not quite right. Um, but he's still an individual. He has a personality. He has opinions. He has strong convictions. And his willingness to stand up and be himself and still have his abilities in front of other people and earn trust is something that either was lost to the changelings in the past. They weren't able to either get that or they lost that. And their solution has been to go violent, basically, with subterfuge. That's what they're afraid of. Is they can't maintain their individuality and be safe, so they have to be deceptive and use their abilities to protect themselves. And they've been doing that for so long that that's just how they do things. That's how I think of it. If I were to suppose.
I feel like that makes sense. I think it's something that we all, you know, don't necessarily struggle with, but I guess, sense take for granted our ability to be our own person.
Right.
And so when you have the ability to not just mimic someone else, but to fully be a doppelganger
Right.
of another person, I think that's a fear that humanity has had forever. This
Right.
fear of being replaced, and we see that
Yes.
pop up so many times, especially in sci-fi. We've got pod people, and you know various other representations of aliens who have the ability to um, look like us, act like us,
Right.
be us, basically. Even
Right.
Battlestar Galactica uses this with the Cylons that are able to look like people,
Right.
and pass for human.
Right.
And they were just as deadly and threatening as ever, but now it's even more so because we can't spot them right away. When their big, shiny chrome domes are rounding corners and slicing people up, once again, you can recognize that as a threat.
Right.
But when they walk past you and they're luxuriously seductive in their flowing dresses and
Yeah.
platinum hair and everything else, you don't see that as a threat until it's too late.
Yeah.
So once again, I think that that's an interesting thing that keeps cropping up, not just in Star Trek, but in other forms of sci-fi. This thing that it strips away our ability to see something as a threat and also as um, something that infringes upon the autonomy of others. Anything
Right.
that does that, anything that takes away our ability to be in control of ourselves, and
Right.
then yeah, I think those are our two main things that we see a lot of. Heck, even the Expanse does that with the proto molecule and how it takes over and subverts whatever it touches
Right.
and changes it from what it was before
Right.
into something else.
Right.
And it has its own agenda, and we see how it affects the people that it infects, and they stop being who they were. Julie is no longer Julie. That kid Katoa was no longer Katoa. He was
Yeah.
this big blue whatever monster. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that that is. I wonder what that's about. Like, what does that say about the collective unconsciousness of humanity? That our biggest fears are that we are going to somehow be subverted by aliens and controlled somehow.
I
Even the
would
Borg have aspects of this.
I would say that comes down to I think everyone has trouble controlling themselves. There's self control is an issue we all deal with, and so the idea of being totally out of control, not because we gave up control or like we abandoned ourselves to some sort of pursuit, but something else took away our self will, and then in the process, deceived others. Like
So
that's frightening. That's super
so
frightening.
it's one thing to willingly give up your control. It's another entirely when it's taken from us.
Yeah,
Is that it?
what's more frightening? You speeding down the highway at 100 miles an hour because you choose it and you risk destroying yourself, or sitting in your car in the driver's seat and you being unable to control. Let's just say your car, like your car just starts going at 100 miles an hour and crashes, or or your body got possessed and you were unable to control it. You're just a passenger in your own body watching things happen. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's horrifying. That's definitely horrifying.
It reminds
But
me, again, Pod People, Invasion of the Body
yeah,
Snatchers. I remember watching that when I was a kid. Terrified me. Invasion
right.
of the Body Snatchers definitely terrified me.
Oh,
Um,
I can imagine.
yeah.
Again, one of the first video games I ever played was Metroid Fusion, which that's part of the plot is that these creatures are able to mimic other things. And in opening, one of the opening scenes is it turns out the kind of the big bad boss you'll face at the end is you, the main character, being your body has your suit of armor has been possessed by a fake version of you and is now roaming around and killing stuff, and you have to confront your possessed armor,
Hmm.
sci-fi armor. But I
So
really quickly want to
yeah.
go back to my point about the changelings as individuals, because every time we've seen a changeling as an individual, not mimicking someone else, they actually have the same placid features that Odo has. So either they are mimicking Odo in that moment, or the costume is just that's how we know them. But if we accept that as the way changelings kind of look amongst themselves, because they're not mimicking someone else, Odo is not mimicking someone else. He is himself in that moment in a
Mhm.
humanoid shape. So that's really what as I was thinking it through as we were talking, like I think that's it. I think the changelings, in order to be individuals, were persecuted because of their abilities, and they chose to 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 hide away. They can only be individuals amongst themselves in private when they do the whole melding thing together. And If they're not doing that, then they're mimicking things which they enjoy doing, but they've been using that for a long time for protective ends, which has also meant violent ends. But I really like thinking about that idea that the changelings, what they really want is to be able to express themselves as an individual people and an individual persons, and they don't get that, um, or they
So
haven't
it's
been
kind
getting
of
that
been
properly.
so it's kind of been under explained that basically to the changelings, the Great Link is everything. That is them.
Right,
And to a certain degree, there is no true individual changeling. They are all a part of the Great Link. They're all the same thing. In fact,
right,
if we remember the episode where Odo first finds them
right,
and he's talking with them and he's asking how many of us are there. She explains it as, when you enter the link, the thought of individuality goes away. She says, the ocean becomes the drop, and the drop is the ocean,
right,
basically meaning that they're interchangeable here. When it comes to their appearance, it was understood that the reason when the other changelings come out of the Great Link to greet Cisco and or well, uh, I guess Odo and Kira when they first got there,
right,
um, that they took on the look similar to Odo's as a
right,
way of showing familiarity to Odo. And
right,
since Odo is kind of he is the face of the shapeshifters for us, they maintain that throughout all of our interactions
and
with
that I totally understand it as
yeah.
as an explanation for what they do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this would also begin to explain why when we see, well, mild spoiler, when we see others, why they look the same but also different because they had other experiences and then they encounter Odo, and so there's like this kind of mirroring that goes on, but they still do look a little different. That's why
Right,
nobody's face is exactly the same. Otherwise, they could just perfectly look like Odo. They would
right,
all look
right,
like Odo walking around.
right, right. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I think that you're right. I think that there was a lot, probably for them, the thought of like they said, they love to shapeshift. They love to change, to take on the shape of something else is how they know it, how they understand it.
Right,
So to them, they were just exploring other paths of existence. They weren't
right,
trying to necessarily take over someone's life, but imagine the first time that they went from mimicking a tree or a blade of grass or whatever to something like the first humanoid they encountered. From that humanoid's perspective, that was probably the most terrifying thing they've ever seen in their life. This gelatinous pool suddenly coalesced, jumped up, and came fully formed out of goo to look exactly like them.
right.
Probably scared the hell out of them. And
Oh,
that's most likely where the persecution immediately began. Don't
right,
go over there. There is a massive pool of goo that will look just like you and it will take over your life.
right.
you know because
Yes,
then I'm sure it followed them into the settlement,
right.
and now there's two of them walking around again. There goes that autonomy, there's the doppelganger, that
Yes,
fear of this other, and that's probably
yeah.
where it all cropped up from, and all they
Well,
were doing was exploring a new path of existence
and as you know, there's the saying, mimicry or mimicry is the greatest form of flattery. So
until
it
it's
was
not.
well,
Oscar
but
Wilde said it, but he was wrong.
my point though is that in the first contact minute, that was supposed to be a good thing. The mimicry was supposed to be like, hey, look, I can look like you. Isn't that cool? Isn't that great? Like I know you, I understand you, and they freaked out. They're like, why does that thing look like me? That is
Well,
super scary. I
I would
don't like
also
that.
imagine that they were probably imitating something that probably only had a very rudimentary understanding of their own existence anyway. We're not
Right,
talking about uber evolved, Vulcans who could have distinguished a difference, and
right,
recognized what was going on. They're probably talking about we're probably talking about like proto hominid types here, who have a very basic hunter gatherer existence at best. And
right.
all of a sudden you're being confronted by something that just springs up and looks exactly like you, sounds like you, moves like you. Probably terrifying.
Yep,
And it
yep.
just and then how myths and legends get, bigger and bigger the more they're retold and everything else.
Right,
And so by the time, you know, an evolved person came along, there was a deeply ingrained, almost instinctual fear of that other doppelganger. The thought of meeting yourself, like we even, there's even a theory now that somewhere in the world there's someone else. There's at least one person who looks exactly like you. And what would you
Yeah.
do if you ever met that person? We'd
Yeah.
freak out. We
Yeah.
would absolutely freak out if you were not
Yeah.
born a twin and
Right.
you suddenly through your travels ran into somebody who looked exactly like you. It would probably terrify you. It would
Right.
probably absolutely terrify you until
Oh,
you
I
figured out a
I
way
must
to establish your differences.
I'm sure I've told you. I guess I don't know if I did or not, but I've probably told you my theory that yeah, everyone does have some sort of doppelganger. Like I've seen people. I'm like, you look just like someone else I know, and there's no way the two of you would ever meet. Like your life paths are just not in any orbit. It's just a coincidence that I happen to see you two. Like there's a young woman, one of my roommates has dated previously, but she came over to visit, and I swear she had a lot of similarities to my aunt. There's no reason this woman and my aunt would ever meet, but it was like, damn, another doppelganger. I'm
Mhm.
swearing it's. I
But
mean,
even for
this
but
woman's in
even
her.
for you, it's not even your doppelganger, but the fact that you recognize the similarities,
Yeah.
it was unsettling for you, wasn't it?
Well, it's maybe I'm just too used to the idea at this point that it's like it's actually kind of fun to pick out when it happens, but yeah, it could be. I can imagine it being really strange.
I think that it would be quite unsettling, and
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's
I
totally
would.
my point, though. Is like, there's no reason for this young woman who's probably somewhere around the age of 30, and my aunt who's somewhere around 60, to ever meet. So, like, it feels like it's actually like somehow preordained that these people will exist, but they'll never interact.
Mhm.
It'll just be a deja vu for people who see them. Anyway,
Well,
ugh.
any final thoughts on Paradise Lost and just Homefront in general while we have a moment?
Um, and I think we've said it all.
Yeah.
I was unfortunately a little disappointed with this episode because I feel like it got a little lost in its story and lost track of the story it had in the previous episode. Again, a three-parter would have been great, um, but it's fun to see a Worf in charge of the Defiant again. It's like
Yeah.
his defining
Yeah.
position now. Is he's it's
Worf's in
almost I think
charge of the
he's
Defiant.
yeah, he's almost been in that seat as many times as Cisco has, and he's only been in the show for a short amount of time.
Yeah, it's very clear that he is quite comfortable on the bridge of the Defiant, which
Yeah,
is quite funny that
yeah.
it's worked out that way. Because yeah, I think you're right. As many times as we've seen Cisco in the captain's chair, I think we've now seen Worf in it
Worf caught
just
up
as
real
many
quick.
times. Yeah, yeah, he did. Caught up real quick.
And he got into battle mode real quick in this episode too. When they got presented with the Lakota powering up phasers, he was like, "Well,
Well,
fire up!"
the Lakota fired first, and then they were
Yes,
like, "Well, what do you do?" And he's like, "We fight." And I'm like, "Yes,
yes, yeah,
get it, Worf. I love you."
yeah,
And then of course the Defiant does a barrel roll and just
yeah. It
unleashes
was a
hell
great shot.
on.
It was a
Yeah, it
great
was a
moment. Yeah,
great moment. I love
yeah,
how they just highlighted, the maneuverability of the Defiant compared to the
yeah.
much larger Lakota.
Yeah, the Defiant's definitely growing on me for that reason, and it makes
Mhm.
sense that Deep Space Nine wouldn't have a full fledged, super, big old spaceship like an Enterprise. It would have a smaller, compact, more maneuverable ship that's stationed right there, and they can use it. And I'm glad they're really making use of it because I did feel in the first couple seasons that was something that was missing
Mhm.
was the more action packed episodes of like TNG. So I'm liking episodes like this where that gets involved.
My
So
only critique is that I wish that they would show the greater maneuverability of all the ships, which I mean, this is something that has been adjusted as Star Trek has continued through the years. The ships, I feel like they've done a better job of addressing the fact that it's space. You have three dimensions. Use them. You've
yeah,
talked about the technology that you use, the magnificent inertial dampers, which stop the flinging of officers to and fro, and why you can do all these magnificent maneuvers and everything else, but we never really saw it. And the only drawback, the reason that we never saw it was the drawback of technology at the time. So
right.
of course, now that things have gotten better with filming and CGI and all that kind of stuff, they've really addressed that. So much so that people have complained about it with some of the newer shows because they're like, that ship wouldn't be that maneuverable. Why not? And I've always seen the comparison of like the ships to like naval vessels. I'm like, they're not going to experience the same thing. There's
Nope.
no ocean, there's
Nope.
no wind for drag, there's
Yeah.
no gravity like that. There's
Yep.
no reason why the Enterprise can't do a triple 360 barrel roll itself. There's
Yeah.
no reason that it couldn't do it. None.
Yeah. There's no reason
Um,
that thing couldn't twist and tumble and spin all at once. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, mild spoiler for you, there's a scene in Picard where the Enterprise does some things and people are like, oh, it never should have been able. Yes, yes, it should, guys, because it's space. It's space. Please understand that. It is space. They
Yeah.
are not on the planet. They are not in an ocean. There is no wind resistance. There's no drag. Yes, it can.
Yeah.
So, and I personally, I enjoyed it. I was like, you know what? That's kind of the scene for the Enterprise I've always wanted. Just this, she's magnificent. Looked great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I guess that's going to do it for us here for Homefront and Paradise Lost. I do want to say that this episode will be available on all the streaming platforms in about an hour. So no more waiting until next week and all that stuff, and we're going to be lagging behind. None of that. And that's great because next week on the 15th, a brand new season of Strange New Worlds finally premieres. So we will get to watch that and then we get to talk about it because we'll be doing a new episode on the 17th. So we'll get to talk about it right away.
Yeah.
I'll try my best to contain myself because you haven't watched Strange New Worlds yet, have you?
No, no,
Okay,
I'm still sticking with the classics, I guess you could say.
that's
Um,
fine.
yeah,
That's fine. I mean, I've watched everything, so I don't really have a choice but to just consume all of it every time.
right.
But yeah, so Thursday the 15th, we'll have the new episode of that. Um, they are still talking about all the other shows that they're trying to get greenlit. There's a Starfleet Academy show that's supposed to be in the works. The Section 31 show seems to be getting some new life breathed into it. There's even rumors of um, uh, a spin-off from Picard entitled Legacy, which will feature kind of what the ending of Picard was and moving into a new show. So I'll obviously we'll keep you apprised what happens. But right now the main thing that's on the horizon is Strange New Worlds, new episode the 15th. And of course, as always, you can find us and follow us anywhere that you have social media. You can also listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. So until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.